They say that monotony is soothing and calms the breath, but for a long time now, nothing of the trivialities of everyday life has been able to lull or calm me, because it was in the very heart of this endless repetition that the thing began that woke me with a sharp pain, when my mother-in-law, Letitia, walked into my house with such confidence that the walls remembered only her steps and her voice. And this happened early on a Tuesday morning when, jingling the spare key that I had foolishly told Darant to give her in the winter, she threw open the door and, without removing her gloves, called my name. "Beatrice," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "It is more proper for a woman at your stage in life to be thinking about the cradle to come, and not about some reports in QuickBooks." And I only squeezed my mug tighter, because her judicial manner was always like thick, expensive perfume. Thick, shamelessly intrusive, no hiding, no venting. Letizia was one of those women who wear their old crowns as if they had grown into their skulls, a former beauty from the posters who eventually became the head of a family corporation and now believed only in the sign, the family tree, and the firm fingers pressing the napkin to the table. And, unfortunately for me, she lived 2 short streets away so she could show up at any hour without calling. And she did. And I was 36. I was listed as a full-time accountant in a regional logistics company. I had learned to smile on the phone and keep silent in correspondence. We had no children. Fatigue lay on our shoulders like a wet blanket. And the marriage, as it turned out later, had long since crumbled into dust under the carpet. She poured herself a cup of coffee as if I had just offered her cream and pie, glanced at the spreadsheets on my laptop, sighed loudly, and said, "I am indeed worried," as if she were sharing her heartache. "If there is no child in the house, who will take over the company? Beatrice. Who will take over the helm, since we have one heir, Darant? And if you do not speed up, the Ferrari branch will wither away here." And I swallowed my irritation, because I knew that this was a medium-sized shipping network, grown out of the stubbornness of her husband Nestor. But she spoke as if she were talking about a power with legions spread across the globe. I rose from the table, straightened my jacket, said dryly that I had a meeting in 20 minutes and that it would be easy for her to close the door behind her. But she didn't even move, and clasped her hands and said, "8 years of marriage. Do you do anything at all?" And I didn't answer, not because I had no words, but because I knew. We had tried. We had cried together in the kitchen among the half-drunk tea. We had gone through empty cycles of hope together, until one day we had fallen silent and stopped waiting. And now it was just me, managing the house, paying the bills, working until dark, and listening in the silence to the echoes of what used to be called marriage. Darant, my husband, had always been gentler than his parents, and at 38 he really did cower next to his mother like a teenager smoking a cigarette behind the garage, and I had once thought there was a rare kindness in that. But now I wondered more and more often if there wasn't weakness hidden behind that gentleness, because he had started coming home late again, first once a week, then twice, then 4 nights in a row, and each time throwing his jacket on a chair, he would mutter, "Dinner with the clients." And at first I believed him, and then there were nights when he would wince at my dinner, and I would ask, trying to keep my voice even, "Have you eaten yet?" And he would say, without even looking at me, "I'm picking up burgers with the boys." And I would quietly remind him, "You don't like burgers, do you?" And there would be silence. That night, when he was glued to his phone and pretending to be invisible, I gently suggested that we go away for the weekend, just the 2 of us, without talking about work or his mother, just to try to touch each other again. And he sighed as if I had asked him to build a rocket in the garage, and said, without looking up, "If you clung to your mother less and looked at me more, we wouldn't have this problem." And there was a sharp pain in my chest, as if I had run into a glass door. "What problem?" I whispered almost without a voice, but he didn't answer, only walked up the stairs and carefully closed the bedroom door behind him, leaving me in the kitchen among the cold plates. A few days later, while going through my bills, I saw an open envelope on my desk. I hadn't rummaged through someone else's. It was just there, white and defenseless. The sender was Coastal Credit and Finance, and when I ran my eyes over the bottom line, my palms went cold. The balance was $1,762.54, and below that were neat line items for write-offs. A Cartier bracelet, a platinum subscription to Spa World, a Louis Vuitton bag. My name wasn't anywhere, but the address was our home address, unmistakably ours. That same evening, when the house was quiet, I knelt down by the trash can and began to sort through the crumpled papers, collecting the torn receipts like a detective would a mosaic of a crime, gluing them with tape along the cuts. And all the dates, as luck would have it, were stuck in the last 6 weeks, and one receipt revealed the cost of a silk robe, $900, another, payment for a couple's massage, and neither figure applied to me. And then I caught a smell on his shirts that had not been in my house for months, thin, clinging, jasmine, like a wine that is not acknowledged, and it haunted me when I folded the laundry and etched itself into my memory when I ironed the collars. I didn't go on the offensive, didn't make a scene, didn't slam the plate on the edge of the sink. Instead, I started watching, measuring the mileage on the speedometer, photographing receipts, saving bank statements. I told myself that I was just collecting facts to make everything honest and accurate. But the truth was that I was preparing for the inevitable, for the moment when I would have no choice but to stand in front of him and say out loud what I already knew. That moment caught up with me 3 weeks later, at 2:34 in the morning, when the sound of a telephone trill cut through the darkness like a knife through fabric, and I immediately understood. It was not my device. It was Durant's phone, vibrating on his nightstand. Although he himself was not home, he had left that evening, assuring me that he was helping with some warehouse audit in Cleveland, and I was about to turn over on my other side when I saw an unfamiliar number on the screen. My finger lingered over the button, but then I made up my mind and answered. A high-pitched, breathless female voice came over the line, and the first thing she asked was, "Are you Durant's wife?" I sat up in bed, threw back the blanket, and barely managed to say, "Yes. Who is it?" At which point my voice broke, choked on the words, and blurted out, "He passed out. In the hotel. Oh my God, he's right in the square, in the city center. They're already taking him to St. Luke's, his heart, please. He's in critical condition." And the connection was cut off, leaving me with trembling hands. I blindly pulled on jeans over my pajamas, shoved my feet into sneakers, grabbed the keys, and the car itself drove me through the night streets, my heart pounding so loudly that I was afraid I would pass out right behind the wheel. The smell of bleach and cold metal greeted me in the emergency room. The nurse at the counter didn't even flinch when I ran in. I swallowed and asked, barely audibly, I'm the patient's wife. He was brought in." She nodded as if she already knew every story like this by heart and said briefly, "Cardiology department. Room 41 to 12. He was just stabilized. You need to get ready." I asked again in a hoarse voice, "Get ready for what?" But my legs weakened under me, my mouth was dry, and I walked down the corridor, which stretched like a lifeless tunnel, where the lights overhead buzzed louder and brighter the further I went. When I was almost to his room, I slowed and stopped because standing right at the door was a woman who was too young and too perfect for this place. Tall, slender, like she'd stepped off the cover of a glossy magazine, her blonde, sleek hair shining like I could pay for it instead of my mortgage, her black designer dress perfectly tailored, her heels clearly not meant for miserable nights, but she was shaking, clutching her Louis Vuitton handbag like a drowning woman clutching a life preserver. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, her face was broken, and when her eyes met mine, she froze, then said softly, You must be Beatrice." And at my name, her voice shook. Her hands shook even more. I stopped a few feet away from her, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe, and asked, "Who are you?" And she swallowed hard. "I'm Inez. Durant and I were going to get married." The words hit me like a slap, and I blinked and asked, "What did you just say?" And she stepped back, embarrassed. "I didn't think you'd get here so quickly." He'd texted me before, saying he had chest pains, but he didn't want me to worry. I thought it was nothing. I looked at her, trying to wrap my head around it. Young, beautiful, crying, dressed like a grieving widow, a bracelet glittering on her wrist, the same one I'd given Durant on our 5th anniversary, and she was the first one at his door, like it was her place. Our conversation didn't resume until hours later, when Inez had disappeared into the intensive care waiting room, and I was sitting next to Durant, numb and silent, listening to the machines beeping rhythmically, the oxygen hoses hissing, his pale face barely animated by heavy breathing, his chest rising and falling as if life were being loaned to him. The doctor had said it was a massive heart attack, that he was now stable, but the damage was extensive. And at that moment, I smelled Letitia's perfume before I saw her, a thick, sweet cloud warning of her approach. And there she was, running down the corridor, demanding, "Where is he?" With Nestor following her with a grim step. I stood up and pointed silently to the door of the room, and Letitia burst in, gasping when she saw her son, then turning sharply to me, "What happened?" And I quietly answered, "I wasn't there." She was about to open her mouth to accuse him again, but the elevator doors opened again, and Inez came out into the corridor. Letitia turned, her eyes slid over the girl from top to bottom, and instead of shock or indignation, I saw in them what hit me harder, recognition. "Oh my God," she whispered, "you must be Inez." The girl nodded, her lips trembling, her eyes full of tears, and she said quietly, "I'm pregnant. With Darrent's child." Nestor inhaled sharply, but Letitia's reaction was not what I expected. She didn't scream, didn't throw her out, didn't even look at me. Instead, she stepped forward and hugged Inez as tightly as if she were welcoming a long-lost daughter, and cried, "Oh, thank God. I was so afraid that he would be the end of our line. You have no idea how long I've been praying for this." I froze as I watched Inez fall into Letitia's arms as if they were old friends, as if there had always been some invisible understanding between them that I had never been able to access. I wanted to scream so hard that the hospital walls would shake. I wanted to double over and vomit out everything that was burning in my chest and stomach. But most of all, I wanted one thing: answers. Instead, death came. Darrent died 2 days later. So simple, so final. He never woke up, never opened his eyes, never said a word to me, as if our 8 years meant nothing. The doctors said it dryly and habitually. His heart had stopped during the night. Letitia sobbed, Inez wailed, and I stood there, empty, scorched like a wall after a fire. The man I had tied my life to lived a double life, alien to me. And now I had to plan his funeral not only with his parents, but also with his mistress. "Including her," Letitia said sharply as we gathered in the stuffy family room of the funeral home. She sat up straight, like a judge, and said, "She's carrying his child." "She's part of the family now." I clenched my teeth and answered, "She's not family." "She is family now," Letitia snapped, and her voice did not allow for any arguments. Nestor sat silently in the corner, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease a headache. "Where do you want her to sit?" I asked, almost not believing that I was saying the words. "With us, of course," Letitia answered without thinking, "in the front row." I felt a chill wash over me. "And you expect me to lead the service? To go out in front of the people and give a speech next to a woman I didn't even know existed a week ago?" Letitia didn't even blink. "She's carrying our future." "Don't be petty." I almost laughed, bitterly, dryly, soundlessly. Petty? They were asking me to swallow betrayal, humiliation, grief, and still smile for the sake of propriety, as if an abyss hadn't opened up inside me. But in the end, I nodded, not for Letitia or for Inez, but for Nestor, who said quietly, "She must do this." Darrent may have been wrong, but he must have his last favor done right. Beatrice deserves it. and I agreed. And then I regretted it as soon as the doors opened on the day of the funeral. The chapel was full of people. Darren's coffin stood at the front, drowning in flowers. I stood next to her, petrified, clad in black, and suddenly she appeared. Inez, in a tight black dress with a pearl necklace, soft waves of coiffed hair, and in her hand the same Louis Vuitton bag. She walked like the widow of a senator, confident, slender, reservedly smiling at everyone. And people turned to look at her, and she smiled at them. Smiled. Letitia led her forward as if she were a person of importance, and out loud, proudly, so that everyone could hear, she said, "This is Inez. She is part of the family now. She is carrying my grandson." I felt the whispers behind me, how my parents became uneasy, how my daughter-in-law looked at me with eyes full of pity. Nobody said anything directly, but everyone understood it well enough. I held my head high, forced my voice to be firm, and gave the eulogy. I held my own. I talked about Durant in the beginning, about what we had lost, even though I felt empty inside. I even held a candle next to Inez until she opened her mouth during the memorial reception in the next room. I was standing at the coffee table, listening to the usual condolences from distant relatives, when I heard her raise her voice. Inez, speaking for all to hear, "I deserved it. 8 years and nothing. No children, no inheritance, no spark." She was just a stopgap. I turned around, and silence fell over the room. She was talking to 2 women I didn't know, laughing, throwing back her hair, and adding, she couldn't even hold his attention. Maybe if she hadn't been a barren little loser, none of this would have happened. My face went cold and the blood drained, but the worst happened a moment later. Letitia was there, putting her hand on her shoulder and saying loud enough for everyone to hear, "You had 8 years, Beatrice." And nothing. Maybe Durant just needed a real woman. There were gasps in the room. Someone dropped a glass, the sound hitting my ears, the air buzzing like a hornet's nest. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. My knees were shaking, and then I heard a voice say, "I think it's time to tell the truth about Inez." All heads turned to the door. My brother Dylan stood there, an ex-cop, a veteran, the only man who had never betrayed me. His jaw was clenched, his gaze piercing Inez, and he was not smiling. He stepped forward, calm and determined, and the room went dead silent. Inez's eyes widened, and her mournful mask gave way to panic. "I knew your face looked familiar," he said, stopping a few feet away, "but it wasn't until I called this morning that it dawned on me." Inez tensed, her fingers tightening around her purse. "My friend TJ says hi," Dylan added. Her face went pale. I blinked. "TJ?" Dylan looked at me, then back at her. Her husband. His real name is Thomas Jameson, ex-military, moved to Denver 3 years ago, married Inez shortly after the rumors started circulating about her. Nestor jumped to his feet, and Letitia's hand slid off Inez's shoulder. "Don't listen to him," she said quickly, swallowing her words. "I left him. We don't live together. It's complicated." "No, it's not complicated," Dylan interrupted coldly. "You ran off with his money, cleaned out his savings, didn't file for divorce, and started playing the fiancé of a man who already had a wife." I felt something slowly but surely rising inside me, like a new fire was beginning to break through the charred ruins of my soul. And as that flame grew, Dylan turned to the stunned crowd and said firmly, "That woman is not Darren's widow. She's still married. Everything she said was a lie." At that moment, as if by some theatrical design, the back doors swung open and a tall man in faded jeans and a brown leather jacket walked in. TJ, I breathed, my heart sinking, and Inez flinched as if she'd been electrocuted. "Inez!" he barked in a voice that shook the walls. He strode down the aisle with confidence, as if it were a courtroom where the verdict had long been decided. "What are you wearing? Whose funeral is this?" His words cut the air, and Inez involuntarily took a step back. "TJ, I told you," she began, but But he picked up the phone, and the recording rang out in the silence. The voice was hoarse, but too familiar to be mistaken for anyone else's. I faked the pregnancy. I just wanted a piece of his money. He has a rich family. When he dies, I'll say the baby is his until they figure it out. Someone in the room gasped, and the sound tore through the air like a gunshot. Letitia staggered and sat down in her chair, losing all her pretense. "Did you lie about being pregnant?" I asked, barely keeping the tremor in my voice. Inez opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, like a fish out of water. "You tried to bury me at my husband's funeral," I whispered, and in that moment the weight of all her lies crashed down on her. TJ stepped forward, pulled a folded document from his jacket, and clattered it onto the table next to the book of condolences. "Divorce papers, already signed by me. All that's left is your signature and a couple of witnesses. Anyone willing to help?" The men leaned closer, looking at each other as if they couldn't believe they were witnessing this. Inez's hands shook as she wrote her name, each letter seeming to erase the veneer of her artificial charm. As soon as the pen left the paper, she made a dash for the door, but Dylan blocked her way. "You stole from a veteran, committed state fraud, and you think we're going to let you walk away?" His voice was cold as metal. He pulled a badge from his jacket pocket, glinting in the light. "Yes, my enlistment is over, but it's still real. I made a few calls this morning. They're on their way to you." Inez's head whipped around, looking for at least one ally, but even Letitia didn't rise to help her. Her eyes wide, she took off and ran down the hallway, her heels hitting the floor like a hammer on a nail. After that, a heavy, sticky silence fell over the room. Letitia sat still, like a stone statue. I waited for her fury, for her accusations, but instead I heard a quiet, broken whisper. I was wrong about everything. There was no fire in her eyes. It didn't bring me relief, not yet, but I knew it was a beginning. Later, Nestor came to me, his hand on my shoulder, heavy but also warm, as if he were trying to share some of the burden. "I'm sorry, Beatrice," he said so quietly that only I could hear. "You don't deserve this." I said, "No." But I survived. And in that moment, those words meant more to me than any victory. Weeks passed. The chaos gradually settled, like dust after a storm. I went back to work, stopped opening my mailbox with a shudder, stopped listening to the silence at night. For the first time in months, I was able to sleep through the night without waking up from nightmares. And then one morning, I noticed that I couldn't bring myself to drink coffee. My favorite bitter drink was repulsive to me. I gave up, wrote it off to stress, but it happened again and again. Just in case, I stopped at the drugstore. In the office toilet, with trembling hands, I did a test. 2 strips. I sat on the closed toilet, clutching the edge of the sink with my fingers, as if it were the only thing keeping me from falling into the abyss. I went to the doctor. Tests, confirmations, numbers, the doctor's smile, and a quiet, "Congratulations, Beatrice. You're pregnant." I went outside, into the sunlight, putting my hand on my stomach, and felt a strange feeling of weightlessness, as if the ground had become softer. After all this pain, after the betrayal, after the death and lies, after Inez's actions, after Letitia's cruel words, after Darren's silence, this is it. A heartbeat. Not his, but mine. And something else. Small, alive, growing. Finally mine alone. I sat in the car staring straight ahead, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to share this with anyone. He'd never given me peace, or love, or safety. But maybe this baby was the only real gift Darren had left me. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile.